Okay, great. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome. It's great to see you all. Thanks for joining us for the meeting. We're going to get started on time, and we'll keep moving because we only have 30 minutes. We'll be ending at 8:15. We're recording this session so that others who couldn't make it can access the material later. I'm Andy Robinson, the Assistant Administrator for Multilingual Programs. If you haven't already, please add your school name to your Zoom name and put in the chat what subject areas and grade levels you're co-teaching or consulting. Also, we link this presentation into the chat. Because we only have 30 minutes, we ask that you please add your questions to the document that's linked on this slide, and you can access that through the presentation in the chat. Okay, our agenda for today, we are going to review our PD plan, share a strategy that develops academic language, and then we'll talk about next steps, which includes a survey to get your feedback. Okay, before we continue, I want to talk briefly about the shift that we started to make this year in the high school ELD program model, the shift that we started in middle school 3 years ago and in elementary 6 years before that. We know that there's still a lot of questions about the model itself. For example, some of you are asking questions for clarification on the role of the ELD teacher in co-teaching and consulting. What's the role of the content teachers? How many teachers should you be collaborating with? How can you use plan time with other teachers, and what does that look like? Assessment too, how do you assess students' progress on the ELPs, the ELD learning targets, especially in consulting when you have less time interacting with students? These are all really important questions. In today's meeting, we'll be sharing the first instructional strategies of our PD series. We don't have time to address those other questions, but we want to support you and your school administrators in understanding the model better. On this slide, you'll see information about some drop-in sessions the MLD is providing to talk through those program model questions. And we'll put that information in our MLD newsletter with the Zoom links as well. I also want to acknowledge that the shift we're making, as you all know, because you're involved in it, is a really significant change in the way we provide language support to English learners. And just like with any big change, we're having some successes and challenges too. We'll continue to have them because it takes time to make improvements and to implement a change this broad. We're still in the very, very early days of the implementation. And it will take years because it involves not just several technical changes such as student schedules, staff schedules, but also a change really in mindset that all teachers are language teachers, and a change also in skill sets, both for the content teachers and in ELD teachers. So thank you so much for all your hard work every day supporting not only the students, but your colleagues so that they can make this shift with us. I also want to thank our teaching and learning TOSAs who are working collaboratively across subject areas so that the strategies we're sharing this year can be applied to all subjects and not just isolated in ELD. Okay, this slide shows your administrators may or may not have shared this with you yet. If not, they probably will very soon. So in September, school and district administrators co-created these 5 student look-fors. These are student behaviors that should be taking place across all schools and in all grade levels. So take just a minute to read those to yourself. These aren't new to Beaverton. They're all from the 5 dimensions of teaching and learning framework. But these are the ones that the administrators chose to focus on this year. So we're crafting our high school ELD plan, today being the first day, the kickoff, to align with these look-fors. and to support them. And so the strategies you're going to learn today will support the three areas that have arrows next to them. That's scaffolding tasks, robust academic discourse, and also helping create a classroom environment that fosters respect for each other, embracing risk, and supporting each other's growth. Okay, so now we're going to talk about our high school ELD plan.
Hey, Rebecca, do you want to talk about this or shall I?
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. I was just waiting for Andy. So this is just kind of a graphic as we were trying to get our heads around it, as Kate and I were talking about it, to think about what could this look like for teachers in both like language arts and other content areas. So you can see over here on the left, it kind of starts out with these Zoom meetings where we're going to have some direct instruction strategy. And then from that, we're hoping that you will be able to come, the ELD teacher will be able to come with a co-teacher to have a half day to really co-plan. We will be working, the TOSAs will be working with Kate on what that will look like. And we know it's difficult to do those sub-plans and be out, but that's really the time that we need, I think, with those co-teachers that are missing right now. So maybe being thoughtful about who to bring to those. And with that, we will be moving to the third part, which is the co-teaching / consulting. So as you are actually doing it in the classroom, if you want Kate or I or any of the other TOSAs to kind of come in and support you, whether that's we help model something that you're unfamiliar with and we do some teaching in your classroom. If you want us to watch something, if there's something going on with a certain group of students, you want us to kind of zero in and say, as I'm teaching, I'm worried about this group, or can you look at this? We are there as teacher colleague support. That is not any sort of visit, that is any sort of judgment. We just want to be in those classrooms to support anything that you're doing. And that being said, we don't have to be invited in. That is an optional thing. We just want you to know that we are here for you in that. After that piece, then the next part is that really, really important part of co-reflection and co-assessment. We're thinking that that first cycle might focus on co-reflection, and then the second one might be co-assessment as the second cycle is closer to the grading period. And again, Kate and I, or Melissa, or Jessica, or Nick Hirschman, who's the math TOSA, can be brought into that too to say, hey, this is what we think. We are co-constructing this with you all as we are doing this. We have looked at different models. And the thing is it's one thing to come in and say, this is exactly how it's going to be. And I know it's frustrating in Beaverton. Sometimes it looks different, but our schools are very different and our models look different at schools. So we also want to be very open and receptive to what each of your schools need, what each of your students need, and what each of you all need as kind of teams and groupings. So we're hoping there'll be 4 cycles, October, November, February, March, December, January, and then April, May. I'm thinking those October, November, December, January, or October, November, excuse me, the first 2 on reflection and the second 2 close to the grading periods, thinking about assessment. Any questions or anything I missed, maybe Andrew or Kate, as I went through that? Okay. And we tried to pick these pieces from Huntingford's text that I know a lot of you have been reading, whether it's the black text or the red text or other text that she has written, has this kind of cycle in it. So we're trying to use a lot of the PD that we're going to be offering and that we have been to kind of infuse this into what's happening at BSD.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, so our question for today is really how can we support the academic language development of all of our students? And we're going to get into a strategy that will help us do that. But can you go to the next slide, Andy? Before we do that, I just want to ask you to think about a classroom that you're in and think about who is doing most of the talking. What percentage of the time is the teacher talking versus the students? And if you want to drop a percentage in the chat, you may. You can also just put your favorite emoji when you have a number in mind. So what percentage of the time is the teacher talking versus the students? 60. Get a number in your mind. And then we want to be thinking about what that talk looks like also. Okay, so does it look like the teacher asking a question to a student who answers, and then the teacher evaluates the response and then asks another question to another student? Or does it look like the teacher asking a question and then the students all building on each other's ideas, right? So they're agreeing and disagreeing and adding on. So we want to, as we think about how we want academic discourse to look like in our classrooms, we want to shift from the image on the left towards the image on the right. Okay, so we're seeing 60 to 75%. Yeah, I would say John Hattie found in his research that the teachers talk 70 to 80, we talk 70 to 80% of the time. So we really want to look at ways that we can reduce that ratio, right? And hand over more of that talk time to the students. So Andy, would you go to the next slide? One rule that we can follow to help us do this, because sometimes it can be difficult to keep track, is just that for every 10 minutes that the students are listening and receiving information, we give them 2 minutes of time to process that information, right? So if they're listening to us for 10 minutes or reading or watching something for 10 minutes, give them 2 minutes to speak to each other, look at each other's notes, compare notes, see what they may have missed, right? And then in that 2 minutes of processing time, one way that we can have them process, could you go to the next slide, Andy? Is to use a strategy called QSSSA, which stands for question, signal, stem, share, and assess. So this is basically a think, pair, share with a couple of layers added in, right? So you'll see the very familiar structure. Teacher asks a question, and then you ask them to show you a signal. The students show a signal when they're ready, like a thumbs up. And then you provide a sentence stem that has that academic vocabulary you want the students to produce. They share using that sentence stem, and then you come back as a group and call on students randomly to see how well they understood. So this is really a strategy for checking for understanding after you've given them information. So can you go to the next slide, Andy? So we're going to try this really quickly. We won't have time to go through the whole process, but this is what it would look like. So question. I just want you to think about this question. I don't want you to answer yet. So just think, what are some of the strategies you use to promote academic discourse in your classroom? Okay, next slide, Andy. And when you have your answer in mind, I want you to raise your hand in the Zoom. So what are some of the strategies you use to promote academic discourse in your classroom? Raise your hand when ready. Okay. And then go to the next slide, Andy. So the signal, it really provides that processing time, right? We're building in that wait time that we know that so many of our students need. Once you've gotten your signals from your students, and I thank you for everyone raising their hands, you're going to give them the stem that has the language that you want them to produce. So one strategy I use to promote academic discourse in my classroom is, right, and you want to choral or echo read that with the students so that they are also practicing the stem before they practice with their partner. Next slide. Then you're going to have them pair up, right? So you have the time for them to share with their partner using that stem, and you tell them, when we come back together, you may be asked to share your response or your partner's response so that they are ready and they know that they are going to come back and be held accountable for sharing in the larger group. Okay. So do we want to do breakout groups or no? All
I
right.
think we should probably keep going.
That's what I figured. All right. So we would have you share. We will be modeling this strategy and practicing with it and going over it more in the in-person session, right? So we're hoping that everyone can attend that. But if not, there's also a video. It's skipped in the slide deck, but there's a video of an example too, linked in the slides that you will receive. So they come back to the class, they come back as a whole class, and they share using the sentence frames that you're providing. And that second partner share comes from your Avid academic talk scripts. So you're giving them the language that they can use to share productively with the class. So one modification that you want to make for your multilingual learners, especially at the earlier levels of English proficiency, is that you are not going to put them on the spot and cold call them. right? You want them, we still want to hold the expectation that they are active participants and full participants in our classrooms, but we don't want to single them out or put them on the spot, because we all know that that's not fair. So one way that you can make sure that they are participating is during that sharing part, you are going to go listen in and tell them something like, that's a really great response. When we come back to the class, I'm going to ask you to share that, so that when you come back to the class, they are ready to share. That gives them extra time to rehearse in their mind. Okay, this is what I'm going to say. And they're going to practice it in their mind so they're ready to come and share with the whole group. Okay, can you go to the next slide, Andy? Okay, so what about our students that are really new to English? So one option is to pre-select students, but that will work better for your students who are farther along in their language development. When they're just starting, you want to pair them up with another student at a higher proficiency level, and then the pairs will form a triad with another student. Because what we're doing there is we want them to have those language models, right? So they can listen to their peers produce this language, and then hopefully they're paired with somebody that they feel comfortable with so that in time they will produce the language. In the meantime, we want them to have those peer language models, and they can share their ideas in their home language, and their partner can share that in English. They can share it in their home language, right? There are many ways for them to participate, but we want to make sure that they are really integrated into our classroom. And we do want to be providing those scaffolds so that they can acquire that English and practice in English. And having them practice with a group of 2 or 3 is a lot less risky than having them practice with the whole class. So being really strategic about how you pair those students. Go ahead. Okay, so this is just an overview. Question checks for understanding, the signal provides processing time, the STEM targets that academic language. They're all sharing, so 100% of the students are producing that academic language. And then when you come back to the group, you're assessing. How did they do? Right now, you know, did they get it? Do I need to reteach it? Which group of students didn't get it, right? And that's really informing your practice going forward. Okay, so this is just an example of what it might look like or sound like in your content area, right? So you can see some of the example questions. In the signal section, you might notice that you can do any signal. You can raise your hand when you're ready, put your pen down when you're ready, thumbs up when you're ready. And then the sharing can also look different. You could have them pair share. You could have them numbered heads together. You can do inside outside circles, lines of communication, right? If you're asking a quick question and you want to have them have multiple opportunities to share. So there are many ways that sharing could look. That's very flexible. And there's also different ways that it can look in assessing. It doesn't have to be orally, right? When they come back to share as a group, you might have them write it on a whiteboard and show you, or you might have them write it in a journal, right? It doesn't have to always be out loud. Next slide. Okay. So then these we're going to get more into when we go in person. But Rebecca, did you want to speak to these briefly?
Sure. These are something that were in the critical reading for Avid this summer. And Avid, of course, grabs all of the best practices and research. And I really loved the physical cues for language coaching. One, because they were like things that I feel like teachers would use, like pair share was like pair share, right? It was very simple. I didn't have to like learn an extra thing, but it gives our language learners and all students like another visual of like when I'm asking you to do this, right? It gives them a little icon of like, hey, we're sharing. Or, hey, if we're going to use complete sentences, instead of saying like, and what color was it? And they're like blue, say the color was blue. So just using some of these very, very simple language coaching. And one thing I always grab on Avid is that for all of our schools, we are all Avid schools, whether we're IB or AP, we have this, we have that, we have the co-teaching, we have consulting. Avid is something we all share, and we all have Avid coordinators and Avid people and students in Avid classes. And so this is just something that I think can anchor us, that we can all do together. That's very, very simple. So this is something that I found very useful and wanted to share.
Okay. So just thinking then, how can we use QSSSA to support the academic language development of all of our students? How can we use those the language cues to reduce the amount of time that we are spending talking in the classroom? So that's what I really want to leave you with today, is just thinking about when you could use this strategy in your classroom. Like you could use it at the beginning of the class to review something previously learned, during your class to stop and check for understanding, end of the class, kind of an exit ticket sort of assessment, right? So this is a really flexible strategy, but it's just a really important one to remember to have the students speaking to each other and giving them that processing time, and giving them the language that we want them to use. Okay, so we're going to go more in depth into these strategies briefly in these next planning sessions, but these sessions really, the idea behind them, and Rebecca, you can add on, is for you to have that co-planning time. As Rebecca was talking, we're doing that cycle of planning time, right? So we want you to have time to be with your content area teachers and plan to use some of these strategies in your class and plan other scaffolds that will help your multilingual learners. If you do have questions about the program model, as Andy was saying, there will be Zoom sessions this Friday, and I believe that's next Friday. Okay. So if we can drop that link to the survey in the chat, we would love to hear what other strategies you would like to learn or see this year. As Rebecca was saying, we're really co-constructing this too. We want to be responsive to what you need. And if there's other things that are not strategies for your classroom, what else do you need? What resources do you want to see? Like, how can we support you this year in your work?